Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're putting on our historian hats to analyze one of the absolute most fascinating sociopolitical shifts in human history. We're going to dive right into the epic saga of the Japanese samurai. For centuries, these legendary swordsmen were the undisputed masters of Japan. They dictated the politics, they fought the wars, and they fundamentally shaped the culture. But by the late 19th century, they had vanished completely as a warrior class. So it naturally brings us to a pretty massive, provocative question. How did Japan's legendary warrior class become entirely obsolete? Because if we really want to understand the ultimate downfall of the samurai, we have to unravel the exact forces that built them up in the first place. You see, their end wasn't just some sudden accident. It was the final domino falling in a massive chain reaction of political, economic, and technological shifts that literally took centuries to unfold. Here's our historical roadmap for today. We'll track the timeline from the rise of the warrior elite, right through the shogun's golden age, a massive gunpowder paradigm shift, the peace of the Tokugawa era, the rapid Meiji modernization, and finally, the last samurai rebellion. All right, Section 1, Rise of the Warrior Elite. Let's look at how a shift in imperial focus created a huge power vacuum. Everything really kicks off way back in 794 AD. The imperial court sets up its permanent capital in Kyoto, which sparks the start of the Han period. But as the years go by, the court gets grandiose. They get entirely wrapped up in their own internal, highly ritualized politics and basically start neglecting the actual governance of the country outside the capital city. And you know how history works, nature hates a vacuum. So, powerful regional clans, most notably the Taira and the Minamoto, stepped right in to fill it. These clans grew incredibly strong, backed entirely by their own private elite military forces. Yes, the early samurai. That mounting tension inevitably boiled over into the Hojin Rebellion in 1160, and then the devastating Genpei War in 1180. The Minamoto clan ultimately won, which led to a completely separate military government being set up in Kamakura by 1192. And this is a brilliant illustration of the paradigm shift of that era. The head of the Minamoto clan basically convinced the emperor to grant him the title of shogun. Now, shogun literally translates to great general, marking the de facto military ruler of what was now a decentralized feudal Japan. So, power had officially shifted. The emperor is still sitting over in Kyoto as a revered figurehead, sure, but true authority, that rested firmly in the hands of regional military leaders, completely backed by the formidable might of the samurai. Moving on to Section 2, the shogun's golden age. Let's see how foreign invasions and internal plotting really tested the samurai's limits. So the crucial point to understand here is that the samurai were soon put to the ultimate test. In 1274 and then again in 1281, the massive Mongol Empire attempted to invade Japan. The samurai defenders were severely outnumbered. They were facing an unprecedented global superpower. But remarkably, they were saved both times by powerful typhoons that practically wiped out the Mongol fleets. The Japanese called these storms kamikaze, or divine wind. But here's where the history gets super fascinating. While they successfully defended their home, the sheer logistical nightmare of that defense practically bankrupted the shogunate's treasury. The money was just gone. As a result, tons of the samurai who had literally risked their lives to save the nation were never actually paid. You can imagine the absolute outrage, right? This financial ruin totally soured relations between the military government and the samurai clans, sparking all these coups and shifting alliances among the daimyo, the local feudal lords. Those simmering tensions couldn't stay bottled up forever. In 1467, the Onin War broke out over a succession dispute, and it completely shattered the feudal system. The daimyo just carved the country up into a patchwork of independent states. This plunged Japan into the Sengoku, or Warring States period. And let me tell you, this was a chaotic, hyper-violent era. It forged the samurai into hardened, incredibly active warriors fighting in a near constant, brutal civil war. Section 3, a gunpowder paradigm shift. A massive technological disruption was about to change the samurai's trajectory forever. 300,000. That is an absolutely staggering number for the mid-16th century. Just think about that scale for a moment. In 1543, a Portuguese trading ship gets blown off course, lands in Japan, and brings European muskets with them. These weapons were totally unknown to the Japanese before this precise moment, but the feuding daimyo instantly saw the potential. They realized that a peasant with a gun and maybe a few weeks of basic training could easily take down a master samurai who had spent his entire life perfecting the sword and the bow. It's a real game changer. The adoption was so rapid and aggressive that by 1556, just 13 years later, over 300,000 firearms were actively being deployed across Japan's battlefields. If you embraced the gun, you had a massive, insurmountable tactical advantage. And this exact technology was immediately leveraged on the path to unification. A brilliant tactician named Oda Nobunaga utilized this new gunpowder superiority to begin uniting the fractured country. After his sudden death, his successor, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who, fascinating side note, actually started as a humble peasant foot soldier, stepped up and completed that national unification. Finally, after another brief power struggle, Tokugawa Ieyasu wins the incredibly decisive Battle of Sekigahara in the year 1600. Boom! This massive victory brings an end to the chaotic warring states period once and for all, establishing the formidable Tokugawa shogunate. Section 4. Peace under the Tokugawa. Welcome to the Edo period, where we find a really fascinating paradox. 268. That's the number of years of uninterrupted peace Japan enjoyed under the Tokugawa shogunates. After centuries of brutal civil war, the country finally takes a breath and stabilizes. The economy flourishes, art and culture explode, the population doubles. It sounds great, right? But incredibly, this long-awaited era of peace marked the absolute beginning of the samurai's slow decline. Think about it. Without any wars to fight, what exactly does a warrior class actually do? The contrast is just staggering. During the Sengoku period, the samurai were fierce, active combatants. They lived in a fluid, chaotic system where military prowess was literally everything. But in the new reality of the Edo period, the Tokugawa shogunate completely locked down the country. They put a strict social hierarchy in place to prevent uprisings, and they implemented a policy known as sakoku, which firmly closed Japan's borders to almost all foreign influence. In this tightly controlled, super isolated new world, the once fearsome warriors were essentially transformed into peacetime administrators, basically stationary bureaucrats. They traded their battlefields for desks, spending their days collecting taxes and managing estates, and this completely unpracticed lifestyle left them totally unprepared for what was lurking on the horizon. Section 5. The Meiji Modernization. Let's fast forward to the 19th century, when centuries of deliberate isolation abruptly shattered. The tipping point hits hard in 1853. A fleet of heavily armed American warships, led by Commodore Matthew Perry, sails right into Edo Bay, demanding Japan immediately open its ports for trade. Now, the Tokugawa shogunate, having been isolated for over 200 years, takes one look and realizes they are entirely unable to match the superior firepower of the U.S. forces. So they reluctantly capitulate. This was a massive shock to the Japanese system. It vividly, embarrassingly exposed the fatal weakness of their outdated feudal structure. Angered and humiliated by this whole thing, southern provinces formed an alliance, marched on the capital in 1868 during the Boshin War, and completely overthrew the shogunate. By 1869, supreme power was officially back in the hands of the emperor, signaling the start of the Meiji Restoration. The new Meiji government looked around and knew that to survive, and to avoid being colonized like other Asian nations at the time, they had to modernize. Immediately. And I mean rapidly. They're introducing railways and telegraph lines, setting up universal education, and bringing in hundreds of Western advisors to totally revamp their legal and industrial frameworks. But it's that final step that really sealed the fate of our warriors, building a modern standing army. By utilizing Western conscription tactics, the state officially stripped away the samurai's most defining feature, their exclusive right to wage war. For centuries, carrying weapons and fighting for the nation was an honor reserved only for them. But now, a drafted peasant with a modern rifle was just as effective. This profound structural shift completely squeezed the samurai out of their historical role. The nation simply didn't need them anymore. Section 6. The Last Samurai Rebellion. Which brings us to our final, tragic climax. By 1877, the deep grievances of the now obsolete samurai class finally boiled over into the Satsuma Rebellion. Local samurai, just deeply frustrated by the complete loss of their status, their stipends, their traditional roles, the whole shebang, rose up in defiance. But they were fighting a futile battle. They were going up against the very modern, Western-style conscript army their own nation had just built. The rebellion was violently crushed. And honestly, it's a profound historical irony. These traditional warriors who had dominated Japan for 700 years were ultimately wiped out by the modernized military machine they had inadvertently helped to usher in by overthrowing the shogun just a few years prior. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought to consider long after this explainer ends. When we look at how the samurai transitioned from indispensable masters of the battlefield to being entirely obsolete within just a few generations, it forces us to ask, what does this teach us about the relentless, unforgiving pace of technological modernization? It's a stark reminder of how societies must adapt, or inevitably fail to adapt, to the future rushing toward them. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into history. Keep asking questions and keep learning.